Hi, I'm James Hamilton from Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, and today I'm going to show you how to cut dovetails with a handheld router that look like they were cut by hand. In the February 2017 issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, we showed you how to make a simple dovetail jig for the router table. You'll find that issue in the archives over at stumpynubs.com or at the link in the notes below this video. But today I want to show you another jig that's equally simple, but it works in a different way. It was originally designed by pro woodworker Stephen Hammer and then improved upon by Matthew Kenny over at Fine Woodworking magazine and then by myself. But before I show you how it works, let me show you how it's made. It has two 12-inch long halves. Both halves are made up of 2-inch wide and 3-inch wide pieces, which are laminated together, creating rabbets down their lengths. Then I bore a 1/4-inch hole through each end of each half. I also added a strip of thick tape to one of the rabbets. You'll see why in a minute. I slipped some 5-inch long 1/4-inch carriage bolts through the holes in one half and hammered the shoulders into the wood so they wouldn't turn. You could add some epoxy if you like, but I didn't find that necessary. The two halves go together with the rabbets facing inward, and a couple of wing nuts and washers go onto the bolts to secure them. That's it for the jig. Let's see how it works. To prepare your workpiece, you only have to mark out the pin locations on the end grain of the board. You can space them however you like and make them any size. Most dovetail jigs require that the pins be at least a 1/4-inch wide because that's the minimum width of the shank on your router bit. Because of that, machine cut dovetails are usually pretty easy to spot. But with this jig, you can make the pins as narrow as you like, giving the joint a true hand-cut look. I use a 1/4-inch bit, setting the depth to the thickness of the workpiece. Of course, you want to set it to the thickness of your tails board, but since my pins board is the same thickness as my tails, I just use that to set the bit. I slip the jig over the top of my workpiece with the taped rabbet on the side that will be facing outward when the joint is assembled. That's the show face. You want to keep it free from tear out. To that end, I added a 1-inch scrap to the taped rabbeted side. That tape acts as a shim, which holds the scrap securely in place when you tighten down those wing nuts. And of course, you want to align everything flush with the top of the workpiece. Now all I do is I cut by eye. The jig keeps the router stable so it doesn't tip during the cut, and that strip of wood acts as a backer to prevent tear out. I work carefully along my lines, removing a little bit of material at a time. Now if you're apprehensive about freehand cutting right up to a line like that, you can leave a little bit of material and then come back with a chisel or even a mill file to clean up that last little bit. Just be careful that the edge of your file doesn't cut into the shoulders between your pins. For the other half of the joint, I trace my pins onto my tails board, being very careful that the workpieces don't move as I'm drawing those lines. Accurate tracing is essential to a tight-fitting joint. Now how do we cut the tails? On the bandsaw. Why the bandsaw? Because while it's difficult to cut pins on a bandsaw, mostly because the table only tilts far enough in one direction, it's very easy to cut tails on the bandsaw. You just remove the little triangles. You could also use a scroll saw if you don't have a bandsaw. Either way, I recommend leaving just a tiny sliver of wood next to your lines. Then you can test fit the joint, and if it's too tight, you can pare that little bit away with a chisel. A well-fitting joint should go together with a few light taps with a mallet, or in my case, a powerful manly fist. I like this jig because it requires minimal setup, and the resulting joint has a nice hand-cut look. You can even use it to cut half-blind dovetails for things like drawers. I'll demonstrate that in a separate video, which I'll link to in the notes below this video once it's ready. In the meantime, be sure to check out the latest issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, full of great tips, tricks, techniques, and tutorials designed to make you a better woodworker. Subscriptions are free over at stumpynubs.com. Happy dovetailing!